Do you really need a trustee? Can't you just negotiate with your creditors on your own? Ted and I are here to discuss it, starting right now.
This is Debt Free in 30. Here's your host, Doug Hoyes.
Ted, welcome back. You get no cue cards for this episode.
No cue cards again. Oh, the pressure.
And I told you the title and topic of the show 45 seconds ago.
That's great.
So that's the way I like to do it. No prep whatsoever for Ted. It's much more fun that way. Mm-hmm. So on this podcast, as you know, we spend a lot of time talking about consumer proposals.
Right.
And why is that?
Well, because it's a very useful solution for most people's debt problems.
Because we make a lot of money doing
you could also
proposals.
say that we make a lot of money selling computer proposals.
Sorry, let's go with your answer. It is a very useful solution for most people's debts.
It is how we get paid.
But yes, I mean, we will start the show by saying that we are biased.
Yep.
This is a significant portion, certainly more than half of the income of Hoyes, Michaelis and Associates,
right,
by a significant margin. So, okay, it could be that we think this is a great solution because we get paid for this great solution, right?
Yeah, but then we'd be telling everybody to do it. So, I mean, we're biased, but not to the extent that you're, alluding to.
That is true. When people phone us, of the people who call us, it is, certainly less than a third of them who end up filing a consumer proposal.
I mean, I'd like to think we always give people the right answer. And based on most of our testimonials, I think people would agree that that's the case.
Well, so let's put that to the test today, and we are going to compare, and let's see if we can actually prove that, yes, the solution we have is the correct one.
Okay.
Now, it's not going to be the correct one in every case, as you just said.
Right.
So when is it the correct one? When isn't? That's the question. So the question is, I've got some debts. Do I need to do a consumer proposal, or can I just work them out on my own? Now, if you have enough money to pay them on your own, then yes, obviously, that's what you should do. Pay them back. What we're talking about, though, is a situation where, well, I don't have quite enough money to pay them back in full. So I would like to negotiate a lesser amount, which is what a consumer proposal is.
Right.
And it's a formal process. You're going to explain it in a minute. You don't know that, but it's on my cue card.
I do now.
You do now.
Surprise.
Surprise. But it is also possible, of course, to talk to a creditor and say, hey, look, I can't pay you the full amount. Can I get a bit of a break? And in fact, during the pandemic, you remember the pandemic?
Yep.
Good old days from 2 years ago. So a lot of creditors, credit card companies, banks did make deals with lots of people. Yeah,
right.
We'll defer your payments. Maybe we'll give you a bit of a break. So clearly it is possible.
Sure.
And there are lots of areas in life where you can hire a professional or you can do it yourself. I mean, you know how to change the oil in your car, I assume.
Right.
I do not. But
strip the gearbox, change the head. I can do all sorts of stuff.
You can do all of that stuff. And so in some cases, you do it yourself.
Right.
But if someone doesn't have the expertise, they don't. Okay. So how do you decide whether you should or you shouldn't? Well, that's what we're going to talk about today. So let us start off with the consumer proposal option. Paint the picture for us. What does a typical proposal look like? Who's the person we're dealing with? What level of debts? How many creditors? Give us kind of an obvious picture.
Well, so let's kind of create a scenario then. So the average person that ends up filing a consumer proposal with us probably owes about $50,000, maybe 60. Let's call it 50 because it's a nice round number. They're working. They probably got a dependent. And the issue isn't so much that they screwed up somehow. They didn't plan on having this much debt. It's they've now got so much that they literally can't afford to make the monthly payments. So on $50,000, your minimum monthly payments probably run between $1,500 to $1,800 a month. And that person I'm describing probably has income somewhere around $2,800, maybe $3,000. So you can't use half your income to service your debt unless you're living for free someplace.
Yeah, because you got to pay rent, you got to buy groceries, you got to do all the rest of it.
So for all these people, it becomes a choice of, well, how many corners can I cut? Well, how many Peters can I rob to pay Paul? And at some point, it's a house of cards that falls apart. You just can't do it. And nobody expects you to be able to do it, right? So you've got to find a way out of it. So the proposal is a legal procedure, and I'm sorry if that intimidates people, whereby you make a deal with your creditors. You say, look, I know I owe you $50,000. I can't afford to pay that back, but I can afford to pay back part of it. And that's really where the trustee's role comes into this, helping you determine what's a reasonable offer, what can you realistically afford, what are the creditors likely to agree to. So the trustee's like we used to call ourselves referees or middlemen.
So what is a reasonable offer in that scenario you just painted?
Yeah, the typical person that owes $50,000 probably is going to end up paying back somewhere between $12,000 and $18,000. Call it $15,000.
So that would be a couple $100 a month, $300 a month over a 5-year period, which is the maximum period you can do.
Yep.
Okay, so that sounds perfectly good.
Well, most people, the first time they hear that, they think it sounds ridiculously good. They go, like how is this possible? Why would anybody agree to that? So you got to remember, when we're talking about doing a proposal to deal with your debts, the alternative is you're looking at personal bankruptcy. Now, that's a word that nobody likes to hear and nobody likes to think about it. But the whole leverage in this negotiation is that you're offering the creditors less than what you owe them, but more than they'd get if you're pushed into bankruptcy.
Yeah.
So it's a win-win in a losing situation for everybody.
And at Hoyes Michaelis and Associates, Inc., which is named after Hoyes and Michaelis.
Yeah, I know those guys.
Pretty good name we came up with 25 years ago. We do two things, bankruptcies and consumer proposals.
Right.
So the creditors know when we're talking to them, hey, we're making this offer, our client can pay $300 a month. If you don't take it, well, then I guess they're going to have to go bankrupt and you're going to get less.
Well, and one of the basic calculations we do when we're determining how much do you need to offer to repay is, okay, if you were filing bankruptcy, how much would the creditors get? So we're not going to let you put an offer on the table where it's actually in the creditor's best interest for you to be bankrupt. And that happens every once in a while.
Yeah. In a bankruptcy, you have to pay a certain amount based on what your income is. So if you think your income is going to go up, you're going to get a bonus, you're going to get another job, then the cost of the bankruptcy can go up. And if you have any assets that are not exempt.
Right. Equity in a house, tax saving account, maybe RSPs for your kids.
Tax refund, something like that, then you would lose that in a bankruptcy as well. So, okay, we add all that up. And like you say, we're going to offer them a little bit more than that. Yeah. And as a result, they agree.
So troll back to your premise then. So we've got this scenario. We've got a person owes $50,000. We'll say that they're making $3,000 a month and they can't afford to make the minimum payments anymore. They just don't have the income for it. So that's when the proposal starts to get considered.
And so, okay, so the obvious reason for doing the proposal is I can't afford to pay somewhere between $1,000 and $2,000 a month on the minimum payments on my payday loans and credit cards and all these other high interest debts and whatever I've got.
Right.
But I certainly could afford to pay $200 or $300 in the example you gave.
Right.
So that's a kind of a no-brainer. What then, other than the pure money, is the advantage of doing a consumer proposal as opposed to phoning up the credit card company and saying, hey, look, I can't pay in full. Here's what I'll give. Yeah. What are the specific advantages of a consumer proposal?
So don't underestimate the value of that financial savings right off the bat. So we're talking about you owe $50,000 plus interest, and probably the interest is anywhere from 12 to 29%, depending on who you're borrowing from. This is where you jab me with the payday loan thing.
Yes, exactly.
Because you know how much I love those guys.
Well, and we know that a payday loan, if you're in Ontario, they're allowed to charge $15 on every 100 you borrow.
Right.
And as I've jabbed you 73 times on this podcast in the previous 400 and some episodes we've done, when you work out the annual interest rate, if you get a payday loan for 2 weeks because you're a biweekly paycheck, that's $15 on every 100, 26 times during the year. What's that, 390% or something like that?
Yes, it's a lovely round number.
So it's a massive number. So obviously now that's the highest interest rate people typically pay. But even a department store or gas store credit card, the interest rate can easily be in the 20% range.
And often it is. I mean, the best interest rates you're going to get are some of the bank cards somewhere at 11 or 12%. Most people are paying 18 or 19, and then you've got the high interest ones at 29.
And then you've got the loans from companies that we won't mention that will often be in the 35% or more range.
Right.
And if you're paying 35% interest and all you pay is interest, you pay the amount of the loan every 2 years.
Yep.
That's what the rule of 70 is, right? So it's wickedly expensive. So, okay, anyway. I accept your premise that you save a lot of money by foregoing the interest. But what are the other specific reasons that I'm doing a proposal as opposed to trying to work it out on my own?
So probably the most important one is that it's a legal framework. It's a structure. All the parties involved in the proposal have rules that they have to follow. And you're probably thinking, well, okay, why is that important? So if you are sophisticated enough to make a deal with your creditors yourself, you have to be concerned with, well, how are they going to report it on my credit report? Are they going to renege on the deal after the fact, and will I have any kind of legal protections? And what if I can only make a deal with 1 or 2 of them and I actually owe 7 or 8 of them? Like, does it solve the problem? So the advantage of the proposal is you've got all of these regulations and rules in place that provide a structure that gives you a guaranteed solution.
So you hit a key point there, renege on the deal.
Right.
So,
and how many times have you heard that? Somebody says, I got called from a collection agency. I paid them $500 and the debt was supposed to be gone. And then 3 months later, another collection agency called me on the same debt because the actual debt was $1,500 and I didn't pay the whole thing off.
Well, and you and I have had many discussions about debt consultants and debt settlements and debt management plans.
It's just Poke Day,
yes,
is it?
Exactly. So I don't give you any cards, so you don't know what's coming.
Right.
So if I make exactly the scenario you describe, I make a deal with the collection person,
yep,
and they say, yeah, okay, fine. You owe us $1,000. If you give us $500, we'll wipe it out. So you give them the $500, unless you've got it in writing from them.
Right.
Then what's to stop them from saying, oh, by the way, we forgot about this service charge you also have to pay, or else we're not completing the deal.
Right.
How is that different in a consumer proposal then?
Well, so again, a consumer proposal is a legal procedure with very specific requirements and statutorily required steps that we have to go through. So it's binding. There's no way out of it once it's been accepted.
And so explain how the voting process works that makes it binding.
Okay. So this is a simplification, folks, but every dollar you owe in a proposal is a vote. And we need 50% of the dollars to agree to the deal. I mean, technically the only way it can be turned down is if more than 50% of the dollars don't accept the deal, but it's easier for people to understand the other way.
Yeah, so it's majority rules, right, based on dollar value. If more than half of the dollars say yes, everybody else has to take the deal.
Yeah, so it's pretty common. So again, we got this $50,000 example I keep using, and that's just because that's pretty typical, folks. If let's say you bank with, it doesn't really matter, Royal, TD, whatever, there's some place that you bank with, and in most cases, they often have more than half the debt. So your primary bank usually gets to decide for everybody else whether or not the deal goes or not.
Yeah, because you got a line of credit with them, you got a credit card with them, whatever.
And that's actually a good thing because, frankly, when folks start to get into trouble, they start accessing types of credit that are more expensive and they're more diversified. And so the horrible examples are those online installment loans and payday loans and all of that stuff. But usually when folks are dealing with those people, it's not a majority of their debt. So a large, reputable bank has control of this process. You don't have to worry about being pressured by these little guys that, I acquaint them to crooks. But
yeah, and I guess there are people watching who would say, well, banks are evil too. And okay,
and they are.
I guess we can debate that topic. But they also are interested in money.
Right.
And if we go to them and we say, look, if he goes bankrupt, you're going to get this much, but in a proposal, you're going to get this much. Well, they're generally going to take the higher number.
Right.
So it is definitely possible to make a deal. Now, the other element to this whole legally binding thing, and another difference between doing a consumer proposal and not, is a stay of proceedings. Explain what that means.
So anytime that there's some sort of legal action taken against you, it's going to follow its normal course unless something stops it. And so by filing a consumer proposal, it's an automatic feature of the law that something called a stay of proceedings is issued. And so a stay simply means you are stopped from continuing with the legal action. And it doesn't matter if it's only just started, if it's already in the courts, if they've already issued an order and they're trying to garnish your wages. The stay stops the process no matter what they're doing, because the whole idea is to give you relief from all of these problems. And if they allowed them to continue, you'd still have this annoying thing going on in the background.
And have you ever had anyone come into your office whose wages are already being garnished?
It happens all the time, unfortunately.
Right. And if they're already garnishing your wages because they went to court and sued you and have a garnishment, it's kind of hard to get on the phone and say, hey, look, I'd like to work out a deal.
It's a little too late for a deal.
Yeah, because they're saying, look, I'm whacking you for $500 a month off your paycheck. Why would I now make a deal where you only pay me $200 a month? Right. Like, there's no incentive there.
And so devil's advocate say, well, then why would they agree to the proposal? Well, so first is the proposal stops the garnishee. So they no longer have that order in place. They can't keep garnishing you. And they know that if they don't agree to the proposal, you may look at a bankruptcy. Bankruptcy stops the garnishee as well. So they've played their cards and they're taking money from your pay. Your counterpart to play then is, okay, I'm filing a consumer proposal. Stops the garnishee, and now we have to negotiate a deal.
So, okay, you've laid out, I think, very explicitly the advantage of doing a consumer proposal. It stops garnishments. It's legally binding. It's the same deal for everyone. So if we get more than half of the dollars to say yes, the little guys have to go along with it. They don't have any choice.
Right.
They can't renege on the deal. And then there's huge financial savings for the vast majority of our clients.
Yes.
Okay, that's all the good stuff.
Right.
So the next question on my cue card here is, what are the disadvantages of doing a consumer proposal? So give me reasons why it's not a good idea. What are the downsides to doing a consumer proposal?
Okay. Well, so the question people ask first when we talk to them about doing a proposal is, and sorry, this doesn't really answer your question directly, is do I get to keep my car? Because everybody's concerned that, if I don't pay my creditors, I'm going to lose my car. Well, that's not the case. As long as you keep paying the car, you actually get to keep it. So it's a perceived downside for those that aren't familiar with the law, which is why I'm sticking it in here. But the truth is it's got nothing to do with the proposal. If you want to keep the car, you keep making your payments. Right? A proposal has a detrimental impact on your credit report. And I'm not as hung up on credit ratings and credit reports as a lot of people are. I think our culture overemphasizes them. But because there is that emphasis, you need to understand what happens.
And that's a key point. And I agree with you. We were way obsessed. I think I wrote a book and talked about that in one of the chapters there. So when you file a consumer proposal, there's a note that goes on your credit report that says you filed a consumer proposal.
Right.
And that note stays there for roughly 6 years from when you file. It can come off early if you pay the proposal off quicker, but let's just assume it's there for 6 years.
Yep.
So, okay, that's bad. Before I file a consumer proposal, there isn't a note. After I file a consumer proposal, there is. What does your average client's credit report look like before they file a consumer proposal?
Yeah, by the time they get to us, things have gone awry for most people. And so the way a credit report works, it reflects your payment history. So if you make all your required payments every month, your credit report probably looks pretty good. If you start to miss, it deteriorates. And when you get down to the point where you haven't made a payment for 3 or 4 months, things have gone to collections or to legal action, or maybe they've even written off the account, it gets ranked as low as a bankruptcy. And so your credit report already looks like hell when you file the consumer proposal. And so the proposal certainly isn't any worse than that.
Yeah, so worrying about making it worse when it's already bad, the question I always ask people is, okay, well, instead of doing a proposal, why don't you go to the bank and just get a $50,000 loan and pay everything off?
Right. If your credit's in great shape, then you should still be able to borrow your way out of debt.
Right. And they always say, well, I tried that and the bank won't give me any money. Okay, right. Well, then it doesn't matter what your credit score is. It's not good enough to borrow money. Therefore, you might as well do a proposal. It can't be any worse than not being able to borrow any money.
Right. And again, weigh it against if the bank gave you that loan, even if they gave it to you at prime plus 4% or something, you're going to pay back $50,000 plus, in the current market, what would that be, 7 or 8% on your loan?
Depending on how long it takes you to pay it back, yeah.
And now we're comparing that to a proposal where you're paying back $15,000 with no interest.
Yeah, and so even if the bank said, fine, we'll let you pay it back with 0 interest,
right,
you're still paying back $50,000 instead of $15,000. If you do the proposal, okay, your credit report takes a hit, but once you've paid back $15,000, the rest of that $50,000 that you would have been paying back can now go into savings,
right,
which is $35,000. So, I mean, that's a huge swing.
Yep.
Would you rather have a bad note on your credit report, but $35,000 in the bank 5 years from now, or 10 years, or whatever it is, or would you rather have the better credit score? Well, I think that's kind of an obvious answer. Now, the other downside, so one of the downsides is there is this note on your credit report, which I think you and I both agree it's probably no worse than the note that's there now, or the status that's there now.
Right.
The other downside to it is, and you and I think of this as the upside, is that we get paid.
Right.
So in that mythical proposal where the debtor is paying $15,000, we're going to get, I don't know, 2 or 3 or 4 grand out of it, whatever the numbers are. And when you file a proposal, we go through all the math. You can see exactly right at the penny how much we're going to make.
It's all disclosed by law. It has to be.
Yeah, and we don't set that fee. That's set by the government. Every licensed insolvency trustee gets the same percentage of what's in the pot. So
Correct.
Just so everybody is clear on that. But what that means is some of the money you are paying in a proposal is going to you and me.
Yep.
It's not all going to the creditor. So if you are in a situation where, okay, I owe $10,000 worth of debts and the proposal for whatever reason is going to cost $10,000 because of my situation, would you not be better off paying the creditor directly? Because then all of the money is going to them, not just some of it.
Well, and so the creditor would be better off because they'd be receiving all of the money. Would it actually make a difference to you? So if you're going to have to pay $10,000 to the creditor or going to pay $10,000 to the proposal, it's the same $10,000. And for the extra protection and assurance that you get by doing the proposal, Unless you're a sophisticated individual or you have only one or two creditors, I don't recommend trying to negotiate. It almost always ends badly.
I guess the only counter argument to that would be if the creditor, when you file the proposal, says, look, I know you're going to have to pay $10,000, but I don't want the trustee getting some of the money, so you're going to have to pay $12,000 to do the proposal. I can't remember the last time that happened to me, but it's possible. Theoretically possible. So okay, there may be circumstances where it is cheaper to do it yourself.
Well, and in that circumstance, do it yourself.
Do it yourself then. Absolutely. Yeah.
We want the solution that makes the most sense for you.
We're totally fine with that. So, okay, now let's talk about that then. When should I do it myself? So you just raised one issue, which is if you have a small number of creditors. So explain that.
Small number of creditors, one, maybe two. Right. And the reason for that is simple. If you're going to try and negotiate a deal with multiple parties, it gets very complicated. So let's say you owe 5 different companies money and 2 of them agree. Well, that means 3 of them didn't. So do you have to keep making payments to those 3? Well, if I have to keep making payments to those 3, maybe I no longer can viably make the deals that I made with the 2 that did agree. I mean, if you owe 1 or 2 people, you can probably handle the negotiation just from a complexity standpoint. But the more folks you owe and the larger the dollars involved, the more difficult that becomes.
So let's say my only creditor is the Canada Revenue Agency.
The Canada Revenue Agency.
CRA.
Our pals.
Our pals. And we get along fine with them. We have nothing problem.
We do. We pay our taxes because we have to.
Please don't audit us. So, okay, so I've got one creditor, and maybe, in 2020 I got CERB and ended up having to owe taxes on it. In 2021 I got CRB and I got some taxes owing on that, and I had to cash in my RSP, and so now I owe $10,000 to CRA. If you go and call them and negotiate on your own, what time period will they typically give you to pay off the money you owe?
So the initial response to a collector at CRA is you got 12 months to pay it off. If you get a supervisor involved, you can probably extend that to 24. They're not likely to give you relief from the interest, though that's possible to negotiate that. So that's what you're looking at. So if you owed $10,000, if they wanted you to do it in 12 months, that's a payment of $850 a month.
So if you can afford $850 plus the ongoing interest until you pay it off, then do it yourself.
And
Absolutely.
There's a catch. They also want you to make sure you're making your current tax installments.
Right.
So paying them for what you owe them for 2 years ago, but not paying them for this year's will get you in just as much trouble.
Yeah, and if you're an employee and taxes coming off your paycheck, okay, you're paying as you go. But if you're self-employed or a contractor or something, different story. So owing a limited amount of money to CRA that you're able to pay back within a year would be an example of a time where, okay, maybe you don't need the formal process of a consumer proposal.
Right.
You do it yourself, and then all of the money is going to CRA. If you get it paid off in a year, the extra interest isn't that big a deal. You're good. But if it's going to be, I need 3 years to pay them back, or 4 or 5, or I've got other creditors as well, then the do-it-yourself option doesn't really work. I guess the other time where you could do it yourself would be if you have assets of your own. You own a house, for example. So how would that work if I own a house or have some other assets?
And so let's say you've got a house, and likely these days, because of the way the market's going crazy, you probably have some equity in the house. If there's enough equity in the house, you can borrow against it. Either renegotiate your first mortgage, which is your best solution, or maybe get a HELOC, which is, a home equity line of credit, or perhaps a second mortgage. Each one of these things gets progressively more expensive, so you got to be careful. And you can only go back to that well once. So if you use up all the equity in your house and you don't cancel all those other debts, the credit cards and the lines of credit, and you run them up again, well, so now you've just doubled down.
Yeah, and so people who came to see us in 2019 and 2020 and 2021, they'd say, yeah, I got $50,000 in debts, but we go, oh, well, you got a house. Turns out you got $150,000 in equity. So in those cases, we generally wouldn't be recommending a consumer proposal. We'd say what you said, refinance, pay them off. Now, by the time this airs in, the spring of 2022, which is when we're recording it, house prices have already started the downward slide.
And interest prices are going up.
And interest rates are going up. So both in Canada and the U.S., the Bank of Canada and the Fed have raised rates. So, the equity may be shrinking. In fact, almost for sure it is. Right. Your costs of carrying an additional mortgage are going up. So it may be a solution. It may not be a solution. You got to crunch the numbers. I guess if you've got, a bunch of stocks or something else, I mean, all your crypto holdings, I know you're a huge crypto guy. It's Dogecoin, right? That's the one.
Crypto, is that where Superman's from?
Right.
No,
yeah.
that's someplace
that's
else.
different. So you've got some other assets. Okay, great. Take the assets, pay it off, and you're good. Okay, final area where maybe not doing a proposal makes sense would be if your debts are statute barred. Explain that.
Well, so this is it's not a new area of the law, but it's certainly gained some focus in recent years because of recent court decisions. In Ontario, for example, there's something called the Limitations Act. A company, creditor, someone that you owe money to has 2 years to commence legal action against you from the last time you confirmed the existence of a debt. And the court has said the best way to confirm the existence of a debt is to make a payment. And so if you haven't made a payment on a debt in the last 2 years, the debt may be statute barred from actually collecting from you.
Meaning if they sue you, you go to court and say, hey, judge, it's more than 2 years old. And the judge is, okay, fine, they can't get a judgment against you. So if they can't get a judgment against you, they can't garnish your wages, they can't freeze your bank account. So you don't really need to do a consumer proposal to protect yourself from that specific debt. Now, if you got other debts or other issues, then...
Yeah, I mean, the problem with this aspect of the law is they don't do anything with your credit report. And again, I'm not a big fan of credit reports, but as long as that debt is on there, it's going to have a detrimental effect to your ability to borrow in the future and to access money at reasonable rates.
And it doesn't stop calls and all the rest of it. So, okay, let's wrap this up then with what I would say the summary of everything you've said is, in a lot of cases, a consumer proposal is a good idea. In some cases, well, maybe there are better options for you. So what's your final advice? How do you advise people when they come in to talk to you about it? What are the big picture considerations?
Well, the hardest part of this whole process is actually realizing you need to talk to a third party, somebody like you or me, to get advice. I mean, this is what we do for a living. The average individual, buys 1, 2, maybe 3 houses in their lifetime. If they're lucky, they buy cars every 5 years. They don't negotiate with financial people on a regular basis. It's not their comfort zone. And so the best reason to talk to somebody about your financial situation is because we've got this basket of tools and we can tell you about this solution, that solution. Consumer proposal is certainly one of those solutions. But as you said earlier, maybe a third of the people that contact us, that ends up being the right answer. It's a question of what do you feel competent to do? You wouldn't, grab the pliers out of your toolbox and rip out your molar if it was a sore tooth. You shouldn't do the same thing with your finances.
I would not do that. I absolutely would not. Yeah, and what we've tried to do today is show our work. Yes, it is true. We do get paid for doing consumer proposals. Yep. So if that's a viable option, we love doing that because that's what our business is. But I think we've also been very clear there are some big advantages to doing a proposal, but there are times where it may be better to do something different. Right. And so we don't hide that fact. We put it out there. That's why we did this podcast. So when you come in and talk to us or one of our people, we will show you, here are the different options, here's the pros and cons, and then you can decide. And that's what I think any professional should do. They should, if you do this, this is what happens. If you do that, is what happens.
At the end of the day, if you always give people the right solution for their situation, they're going to refer their family, their friends. They're going to know that, okay, this guy did what was right for me, so I trust him to tell other people to go see him too. And that's why we're in year number 24 of Hoyes Michaelis and Associates. Is that right? Is it year 20? I think it is. So we'll have to do 1999. The math. There you go. Do the math, people, and you'll know. Excellent. Well, I think that's a good way to close it. Thank you very much, Ted. So the point is there are options. Understand the big picture, get some professional advice, and then make your own decision. That's what we want people to do. That is our show for today. I will put notes in the show notes over on YouTube about consumer proposals. You can look them up. We've got a bunch of articles on our website at hoyes.com where we compare the different options so you can do your own research, figure it out for yourself. If you are watching on YouTube, hit all those different buttons that are there, like, subscribe, notification, karma, tell your friends, whatever. And if you're listening to this on the audio version, which is where most people listen to it, Debt Free in 30, please subscribe. Every Saturday morning, a new issue comes out. So until next week, thanks for listening. I'm Doug Hoyes for Ted Michaelis. That was Debt Free in 30.